Hello, everyone. It's Laurie and Jennie of AstroPath, and today we are talking about the Aries full moon. Quick intro. Jennie is from Hidden Path Astrology. You can find her at hiddenpathastrology.com. You can find all the other information about her below in the show notes. And I am Laurie of AstroLore. You can find all the information down there as well. The only thing I want to let you know is on Etsy, I do have workbooks that you, oh, that's not true. I don't have a workbook for the full moon, but this full moon is falling very close to the beginning of Libra season. So it's not too late. You can go to Etsy and get the workbook of Libra season. That would be worth taking a look at with your own chart. You can kind of track the whole season, and it's a fun little way to work with it on a personal level. Jennie, what do you have going on that people should know about?
Oh, I'm always just, I do a seasonal meditation with every zodiac season, and just sign up for my newsletter. I've made some changes to my newsletter where you get the blog, but you also get a little bit of extra personal notes a couple times a month too. That's it. That's all that's going on for now.
Yeah. Pay attention to Jennie's meditations. They're really great. So from there, let's just talk about this full moon. First, let's go through a quick explanation of the lunar cycle.
Yeah. So this full moon is happening on September 29th, FYI, 5:57 a.m. Eastern. It's in Aries. It's at 6 degrees of Aries. So full moons are the kind of culmination phase. I think a lot of full moon is kind of like when the flower blooms and you see this big, I was thinking about my peonies early on in the year, the flower blooms and you're like, oh, it's this exciting moment. When you think about the plant cycle, which we always compare it to because it's so helpful to think of it that way, the seed gets planted at the new moon, it's deep and dark in the soil, the seed cracks open, it sprouts, you start to see vegetation at the first quarter moon a week later, and then 2 weeks later, here we are at the full moon, big bright flower shows now. After the full moon, it's all about releasing. So the moon starts to wane, the flower blooms, and then it does its reproductive cycle and makes a fruit. You harvest the fruit at the last quarter moon, and then that whole last week is all about releasing the cycle, letting it go into compost, and so that the whole thing can start again. We like to use the month-long cycle, which is the lunar cycle. You can also think of these things in terms of a year-long cycle. But that, in a nutshell, is the phases. You have anything to add about the phases?
I don't think so. It's really interesting and, deserves a lot of attention. If you're really interested in astrology, get really clear about how these phases work, and you can also think of it from the perspective of the farmer's almanac, as far as when you do plant seeds, and there's all kinds of ideas there about what should be done at the waxing of the moon and the waning of the moon. There's a lot of interesting stuff to learn about the phases of the moon, but today we're just talking about this one particular full moon. So are we ready to open up that chart?
Yeah. So let's open that up, and let's just mention too that, again, Laurie, great, have the dates here for us. September 29th, 5:57 a.m. is the Aries full moon. This full moon is the full moon of the new moon that started September 14th. This is the month-long cycle. September 14th, we had a new moon in Virgo. So we planted that seed in Virgo soil. So this is practicality, very sort of organized and just thinking about tasks a lot. And then here we have this full moon. So it's very different going from Virgo to Aries. If you want to use the longer cycle, which is great, we had a new moon in Aries on April 20th of this year. It was at 29 degrees of Aries. It was an eclipse, and it was square Pluto, just to make things really spicy. And it happened at midnight Eastern. So there's a lot of things about that. So that was the longer cycle. Think back to April 20th. I know a lot of people who've got some stories about what went on because it was an eclipse. You may be seeing results now from that 6 months ago-ish time. Not quite, but close.
Yeah.
So I just want to mention that.
Yeah, that's a really interesting cycle. Really paying attention to these 6-month cycles are really, really fascinating. So,
Yeah.
okay, what else do we want to think about? Just in looking at this chart, there's not much that's really closely related to the full moon itself.
Yeah,
However,
yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
no, I was just going to say, you know, there are a few things that we want to point out. One is when we look at this, we want to think about the first of all, I would want to look at the planet that rules the full moon, and that is Mars, right? And the thing that's interesting about Mars right now, and one of the things that we really do talk about a lot when we get into the individual impacts, is the idea that there is something in this Libra area that is kind of problematic, something from the past that needs to be released in order to see that full bloom of this full moon.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, exactly. Like we talked about a lot in our Libra season video, the need to deal with some sort of old habit or some way that you were dependent or gave away yourself too much or were overly diplomatic. Those are some of the Libra themes that we talked about in that video and that are very prevalent at this full moon, where you do want to think about, you know, where do you give yourself away? Like, where do you sort of leave yourself behind, and you just kind of, you want to ingratiate somebody or please somebody or be super cooperative, even though you have a different opinion, or, you know, those are some of the things you want to think about. And we're thinking about them in terms of like, is there something that needs to be released? Is there some old pattern that just doesn't really help you anymore, that isn't helping you with essentially Aries topics?
Yeah. An old pattern or an old relationship, an old story from an old relationship. There's something that is kind of standing in the way, something that needs to be released in order to open up that door into that full courageous Aries full moon.
Yeah. And I mean, so exactly that's what I was thinking, is like, so now, you know, we should talk about Aries a little bit. Like, Aries is the first planet in the zodiac. I always think about ignition. This is how everything is boom, and it just starts. It's like when you build a fire in your fireplace or your wood burning stove, you make some newspaper and then you put some little kindling and it goes up really quick. You know, it immediately starts to burn, and it's what gets the fire going. So that's what Aries is all about. And psychologically, this is so much about our independence, our autonomy, like who we are just as individuals, how we stand our ground, how we dig in and find the courage to face the things that we need to face, like where and how we need to stand alone. Yeah.
Aries is a really interesting sign. Yeah, because it's the fire, it's the cardinal, it's so much about, like you're saying, ignition. But it can't help itself, right?
Yeah.
It can't help itself. Sometimes it might be better if it would calm down, but it goes up very quickly. One of the things I always think about with Aries is, you know, if you're in a dark alley and you hear somebody coming up behind you, you want to just be able to grab hold of that Aries energy and use it. It's very powerful, very direct. It doesn't stop. It doesn't ask questions. It just does what needs to be done.
Yeah. I mean, you can just follow along with what you're saying. It's like, it's survival.
Yes.
You know, it's the pioneer making its way across unknown territory, and it's just doing it.
Yeah.
And you're right. It doesn't have time, doesn't stop to think. It's not considering. It's who you want in an emergency situation. I mean, anybody with a Aries moon, it is going to be helpful in crisis.
Yeah.
And so that's part of what we're thinking about. But what we really need to consider is at a full moon, how does that play with Libra? You know, what are we really getting at? And in a way, this whole Aries full moon is about self and other. It's about who you are and how you stand up for yourself and be independent, yet how you remain in relationship with people. How do you still stay together with people? How do you not just cut all ties and blast off into the, you know, the universe. It's like you want to be in relationship, and we're in relationship all the time. Like, we have people all around us. We are, whether or not you have a partner is not necessarily a question, but you sure have friends, you have coworkers, you have, you know, you might have children, you have parents possibly still, and on and on. I mean, we are not doing this in isolation. So the story of Aries, it's independent, but it is not isolated. And the Libra piece comes in to really remind us of relationship.
Right. And I think it also, you know, one of the things we've been talking about here is the relationships that support us to be independent. You know, we think of that independence like we're standing all alone, but we're not. We're standing on the shoulders of the people who support us. No matter how independent we are, we can't do that without the support. And I think that's a lot of what is necessary to look at this full moon is, okay, we want independence in a certain area of our life. At this full moon, we see this shining independence, this shining courage to reach that independence. But we don't want to cut off our relationships, because suddenly we would realize how dependent we are on those relationships to reach that state of independence. It's kind of almost an oxymoron, but it's just they're dependent on each other. Courage and independence is dependent on other people.
Yeah, and you gave a great example in the beginning, before we started making this video about, you know, oh, I need to go away and be on retreat. It's just time for me to have a little retreat. And while you're away, your partner was, you know, looking after your house and taking care of the cat, and, you know, and then you got to come home to this clean apartment, you know. So that's the kind of thing we're talking about. You gone and done your independent thing, but you're supported by, you know, this other person who loves you, who cares for you and takes care of you and kind of defends your solitude, essentially.
Right.
You know?
Oh my God. Do you have that poem?
I do.
I want you to read that. I think that is so, it just goes to the crux of this, at least that first sentence or two of, you know, how dependent we are on others for our independence.
Oh, it's a really good way to put it. Yeah, I found this, it's the Letters to a Young Poet from Rainer Maria Rilke. And here's the quote. It says, and it does talk about marriage, but the point of marriage is not to create a quick commonality by tearing down all boundaries. On the contrary, a good marriage is one in which each partner appoints the other to be the guardian of her solitude, and thus they show each other the greatest possible trust. And it goes on to say, a merging of two people, which I think about Libra, is an impossibility. And where it seems to exist, it is actually a hemming in, a mutual consent that robs one party or both parties of their fullest freedom and development. But once the realization is accepted that even between the closest people, infinite distances exist, a marvelous living side by side can grow up for them if they succeed in loving the expanse between them, which gives them the possibility of always seeing each other as a whole and before an immense sky.
That's really beautiful.
It sums it up. It sums this axis up.
Yeah, that one little piece. Which piece is it? That one little piece of defending one's solitude. That a relationship, the purpose of a relationship is to have someone to defend your solitude, or to defend your independence. And that's if we could do that in partnership, if everyone could just focus on that as a primary goal in partnership, what an amazing gift to have a partner who will defend your independence. That's anyway, off on a little tangent there.
No, that was great. I think it really summarizes what we're getting at here. And just to, again, summarize here is what we're looking at with this Aries full moon is, where do you want to be independent? What kind of support do you have from those loved ones to be independent? And then what old baggage story idea do you need to release in order for this to happen? Because that's definitely the work that's being asked of us to Libra season, and invite you to watch that Libra season video for more information too. So
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, you know, Jenny, I think we should go. I know that there's a million other things we could talk about here. We talked a little bit about the Mars that rules the full moon. Was there anything else about no, just that it was connected with the South Node. And I think we should just go straight into the individual impacts. What do you think?
Well, let's just mention really quick, this is not a big topic, but just simply that Venus in Leo rules Libra. And like I don't want to just talk about the rule of one and not the other. And that the Venus and the Mars is in a sextile, you know, as well. And and that's that same day, yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, I messed you up there.
No,
I tricked you.
That's okay.
I tricked you. Yeah.
Yes, you did.
That's, you know, I just want to mention that Venus is doing Leo things. Mars is kind of a little bit stuck in Libra next to the South Node. And all it does is it continues to underscore this picture of like self and other, you know, how do you do it?
Yeah, and that sextile aspect, that's really great that there's a sextile aspect between the rulers of these two signs, because that sextile aspect is always an opportunity, a possibility. So this really does open up this opportunity to move forward into that Aries area. So those two planets, the Mars and Venus, rule the sun and moon, and obviously rule the south and north nodes as well. So this really is a time of paying attention and learning. There's an opportunity to learn a lot about how to get where you're going through the dynamics and understanding of your relationships.
Nice.
Huh.
Yep.
It's fascinating.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that's good. I mean, there's, like you said, plenty of other things to talk about, but let's move on.
Let's move on. Let's talk about, there you go.
Oh, look at your graphics. Nice, Laurie. Laurie makes all our graphics. They're great. All right. So those of you with Aries rising, like, woo, this is personal. This Aries full moon is landing right in your first house. This is the house of self. This is the house that describes your overall direction as a sort of pioneering type of individual. Anyone with Aries rising, like there's a big focus on being an individual, and it's a big question in your life, how to do the self and other business. And this Aries full moon is really just raising what is for you probably something you've really had to wrestle with over the course of your lifetime. So the question you want to ask yourself here is, you know, are you being independent? How are you being independent? And then really, how does your partner support your independence? You know, how does the partners you have in life, whether it's your marriage, you know, your colleague who you have a business with or something like that, or any of your other independent, like one-on-one relationships. So that's what you want to get at. Who supports me in being my own independent self? And then with Libra season, really bringing in that question about some old baggage or old idea, you've got to ask yourself, like, what idea do you have that isn't really clear, that isn't really right, that kind of holds you in the past? And can you release that? Once you identify it, can you release it to have a more balanced partnership? I mean, that's really what's going on here.
Yeah, there's some old story about yourself in relationship or about your partner. There's some story that they are too dependent, or you can't be fully yourself because there's a weight on your shoulders through your partnerships. You know, and it might just be some old, you know, something hanging over from a relationship you had when you were very young. But there's just the need to let go of that and look clearly at what your current partnerships offer you, how they do support you in the way that real quote that you just read, Jenny. How are you supported in your independence by a partner? Look for that, find that, celebrate the fact that you can develop relationships that will support your independence. If you're not there yet, That's fine. There's work to do because the South Node is in that 7th house. So you're working to develop relationships that support your individual independent expression of self.
Yeah, nice.
Mm.
Yeah, just, is what you're doing independent or is it selfish? That's kind of what you want to try to play with a little bit and considering and what's going on in your partnership. So
yeah, you don't want to kick your partner to the curb because all of a sudden, without that support, you're not going to be able to be the courageous self that you want to be. You need support from others.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's kind of funny. You think about that. Just, you don't want to knock the legs out from under you.
Right, because the tendency could be totally that, like, oh, I'm done with you. And if you've had a lot of relationships, it's time to really think about
exactly.
the right thing to do.
That's the danger of Aries, is acting too fast, not thinking clearly about what the results are, and just like having a moment of frustration and blowing your whole life up. People with strong Aries do that multiple times before they figure out that it wasn't the best thing to do. Okay. Now, moving on. Those of you with Taurus rising. Okay, this is a little trickier. With Aries rising, this was pretty darn easy to talk about. But for those of you with Taurus rising, this full moon is landing in your 12th house. So you're really thinking here. You're really, the illumination that is going on is around your own unconscious thought processes, your own, maybe your spiritual life. There's some way in which you really need to develop the courage to dig around in there and know yourself, to really know yourself well from a deeply internal space. With the polarity, there's really the idea here that in order to do that, you need to be supported by your day-to-day routines and possibly the people in your life that support those day-to-day routines, whether those routines are, a daily writing practice or a meditation practice or an exercise practice or a dietary practice. You know that those practices are supporting your internal courage to do your work. There's some story from the past connected with those routines that might be tripping you up. And that's what you want to be really looking at here. What's tripping you up from the past? What story that maybe somebody told you when you were young about your routines? I don't know. What do you see there, Jennie?
Yeah, well, I really like the way I got the image in my head at the beginning of the Aries full moon landing in that 12th house, like this way in which Taurus rising, that you just need to really be courageous in facing your own stuff. Like, this is not easy. Like, there's some way that a core sense of yourself is deeply buried. And this full moon is giving you an opportunity to kind of unearth that a little bit and, really be brave and I kind of had this image of like having to descend into the dark and like go down there and really work with something that you're probably a bit afraid of, but is truly the source of your liberation, by doing that. And this Libra season is giving the opportunity, yes, to work with the polarity, to really look at, is there a place that you're just overly dependent on one particular way of doing something? It could be something that has to do with your health, like you always do the same thing, but it actually doesn't really support you. But the Libra thing certainly does suggest a relationship. So part of that could be, the 6th house can be colleagues, like people that you work with. But it also can be the practitioners you work with, like maybe you are able to get a massage or something like that. Like you can swing that. Maybe it's time to switch that up. There's a new person who can really support this process for you. But Laurie, you're absolutely right. And the key here is to identify what's the hang up. What's the idea that just kind of has you sucked down in the wrong direction, that isn't really supporting you being this brave soul and facing some of your demons, let's say. So I think that's the key piece.
I really like that, when you brought up about, if you've had the same massage therapist or whatever, the same practitioner for a long time, maybe it's time to, there's something that needs to be released in order to start working with it in a different way.
Yes.
And it could be just, your daily dietary practices. Maybe they are not supporting your innermost psychic growth. Maybe you need to really change that. There's some pattern of behavior in the realm of your routines that needs to change. And watch the video on the Libra season. Some of this is kind of repeating that because it's connected. It's so closely connected. But here you are. Okay, are we ready?
Well, I do want to just add one more thing, which is just simply really think about the 6th and 12th, your health. There's a factor about your health. A lot of times the 6th house refers to physical health, the 12th mental health, whatever the iteration is, but that's the purpose. There's a sensitivity here, and you've got to kind of work with your health, any health concerns that you might be worrying about. I just want to throw it in. It popped in my head and seemed important. So
good.
There you go.
Thank you, Jenny. Okay, moving on to Gemini rising.
Yeah, so Gemini rising puts this Aries full moon firmly in your 11th house. The 11th house is your community. So what comes to mind instantly, Gemini rising, is this leadership ability in groups. That this is highlighting, you have Aries in the place of groups. This is definitely suggesting some way in which you pioneer something totally different, the way you jumpstart ideas in a community. That's where the attention really is, showing you where you shine as a leader. But because we're in Libra season, and Libra season has really made this suggestion that there's some sort of hang up or baggage or something, or some way that we really are overly dependent on others in a way that isn't really healthy. Now that Libra business is falling in your 5th house of creativity. So I think what came to mind before was this idea of it's kind of like you're doing a creative process and you're kind of looking around, like you're looking for praise, you're looking for people to kind of support you, to say, yeah, that's great, good job, but in a way that is keeping you kind of infantilized, that you don't really recognize yourself as a fully creative being. So that's what you really want to that's what the work is kind of honing in on the whole, where do you give away yourself a bit in your creative process where you just don't feel very secure or strong in it. That's what's got your focus. So
I want to just add with that 5th house, for the most part, I like to think about it as creativity also, but we also want to remind you that the 5th house can be children. So, there could be some way in which there's some insecurity around how you're raising your children. Similar to how you're doing your creativity, or just the 5th house is really, it's how we give of ourselves, how we give love. And there is with Libra there, we're trying to please others. We're trying to please people with how we're doing these things, how we're creating, how we're raising our children, how we're giving of ourselves. We're trying to please others. And with the South Node there's some storyline in there that really, this is a time to start really paying attention to what needs to be released, what old storyline about how you give of yourself, about what your creativity is, whatever it is, something about how you're giving of yourself you need to start questioning. And you also want to think about how let's see, I'm thinking about your creativity, how you give love, and how that supports your being a leader in your community. How your pleasing others supports your being a leader. So, there's a link there. There's a link there, but your focus really is to just pay attention to that polarity and really think about what is it I need to let go of in the one realm of how I'm giving of myself, and how I stand in my power as a leader in community. And when we talk about community, I want to be really clear. We're not talking about all our group of friends that you go out to brunch with every weekend, you know, that, or whatever it is, your friends. This is not your necessarily, it can be, it's kind of tricky.
Yeah.
The way to think about it and the way to determine the 11th house community is to think about what your goals are, what your hopes, dreams, and goals are for the future, and the people that support you to that. You know, it could be your dance class, it could be your you know, whatever it is. If your goal is to become a great dancer, then your dance group, you might not know the people in that group, but that's a community that's supporting you to the future. And with the moon shining in that house, you want to really think about how you are developing your leadership qualities in that area.
Yeah, that's, you know, as you're kind of this polarity between the two, as you were talking about these things, Laurie, it really came to my mind, like, you know, if you are that leader in front of groups, like let's say you're getting up in front of the group and you're presenting certain material, well, where does that material come from? That material comes from your ability to creatively work with it. And you may need, that doesn't come from yourself, that comes from you being able to talk with like-minded others or what have you, in that, like, doing creative process with other people is the point. That's where you're getting the kind of the understanding about what you need to go and present on in that leadership situation. So there's some that might not be exactly your scenario, but there's some way in which there's a group or a interpersonal process with others that is providing you with the sort of zhuzh to go and be that leader in front of the group. So just think about how that plays out for you. But that's what came to my mind when you're talking about it. So I kind of struggled with polarity a little bit. So it's interesting.
I love this polarity. There also, with Libra on that 5th house, there could also be, you know, you may have a partner that is creating those things that you're bringing and presenting to the community. But there's some way in which the creativity is probably a collaborative focus. And
exactly.
And that's the thing with the South Node there. You want to think about where you have in the past not felt supported in your creativity, where you have felt like people stand in the way and don't support you. And you may have an old story where you don't trust your own creativity because of that. So this is really an opportunity to see how creativity supports your leadership abilities in community.
Nice.
And
great.
to let go of whatever that old story is that keeps you from it. Yeah. Okay.
Well done. Yeah.
Let's go on to Cancer rising. Okay. With Cancer rising, the Aries full moon is in your 10th house. So people with Cancer rising have, you know, Aries in the 10th house is a very powerful leadership statement in itself. And this is really highlighting the polarity between the 10th house and the 4th house. The 10th house, I just can't go on even another second without noticing that our visual here got really mixed up. Jennie and I are kind of falling over. There's some random plant here and a random red box. I don't know what happened. At any rate, those of you with Cancer rising get to see that little mix up. So back to the polarity between the 10th and the 4th house. The 10th house is career, it's reputation, it's at the top of the chart, it's how the world sees you. And the 4th house is home, family, ancestry, the deepest core of who you are. Now, so this full moon really highlights your leadership qualities in your career. But you really need to pay attention to how your family supports that or doesn't. You know, with the South Node being there in Libra, there's some story about your family not being supportive, or some way in which a family member, it's an old story. It's an old story that it's time to really start untangling and getting rid of, because there is, if you take that old story out and you look at where you're at now and you consider what is the support that you are receiving from your home and family right now in your career.
Yeah. I mean, I think what's interesting about the fourth house is, it's where we came from. It's in a lot of ways, it represents childhood or parts of our childhood. And it's really, really easy to have dependencies in that fourth house, like one way or another, because it was when you had no choice, when you were dependent, this is part of what it represents. Like, so whatever your past family life was, which this South Node in Libra is referring to. So that's really, I mean, it's natural to just have a lot of baggage around this place, but if you're watching this, you're older now, you're an adult, that you have an opportunity to kind of see that in a new way and see that that old story is not your current reality. I mean, there's always threads of who you were in the past, and you carry that forward into your relationships, of course, but this is a great opportunity to really distinguish between those things and really get a new picture of the support that you have, that you really need, that allows you the solitude, the independence to do the thing that you need to do in your career. I mean, so managed well, this is such a helpful situation, so it really would behoove you to do the work you need to do to release that baggage, that family baggage. So
yeah, because that's going to really allow you to find that the leadership qualities, the warrior out in the world.
all right, I gotta go, I got stuff to do.
Hey, wait a minute. Hey, wait. Yeah, let go of those old family patterns and become the great pioneer in your work. Okay, we are going to move right on to those of you with Leo rising.
So Leo rising. All right. This really brings that, independent, autonomous focus into your ninth house of your worldview. So your worldview is something that you kind of cultivate over time through your experiences. Maybe you travel, maybe you have some great teachers, perhaps you went to college or some other school, and you've kind of gathered these experiences, and all of those things together help you form your worldview. And so this Aries full moon is really putting the spotlight on that very independent viewpoint that you have of the world around you. But the thing to pay attention to, we're in Libra season, and as mentioned, this Libra season is really bringing in these topics of having to confront some old baggage, or some way that we're dependent, or some way that maybe you're just too nice in a certain area and you kind of give yourself away. So for you with Leo rising, this is all about your communication. The third house is so communication, but also can be your navigation, how you navigate the little nuts and bolts of your daily life. That's what the third house is about. But communication is a good one to really focus on, because it's some way that you possibly just kind of give yourself away in the way that you talk, like you're overly diplomatic, or you kind of kowtow to you like a sibling, because the third house is also siblings, and you let them speak for you. And you just kind of, if you're in that kind of indecisive, wishy-washy Libra place that it can be, that's where you really need to focus. Like, that's where you really need to go, what is going on there, and how can I let that old idea go? What's at the root of that idea, and how can I change my language to keep being diplomatic and inclusive, but not dependent in an unhelpful way, in order to have that great, courageous worldview.
Polarities are so fascinating. I mean, if you just think about the third house as your voice and the ninth house as your worldview, you need to have a voice to express your worldview. And it is really, if you think about that, the diplomacy, the overly pleasing qualities of Libra, you know, and I don't want it to sound like Libra's a bad sign. Libra's awesome. And it has to, you know, it has to go through this process of pleasing in order to understand and create a voice of diplomacy. And that voice of diplomacy is what allows that strength of the worldview to be taught, for instance, the ninth house being teaching as well. And yet, yeah, with this setup right now and that south node, I'm probably just repeating what Jennie already said, but there's just some old story about you not being able to speak up for yourself, or, you know, every time you tried to speak up for yourself when you were a kid, your, you know, brother kicked you, or whatever the story is about your inability or your difficulty in using your voice in a courageous, sharp, and not sharp in a negative way, but just determined manner. There's something in that polarity that you are able to see. You know, the thing with a full moon is it brings clarity. It's like all of a sudden there's light where there wasn't. So there's an ability to see what it is that you need to shift and tweak and change and let go of in order to allow that voice to come into its strength.
Yeah, I got kind of excited when you were talking about this, because I was thinking about, you know, Leo rising is, you know, this kind of is a pretty powerful rising sign. Like there's a real possibility for being a leader in some way, I think, you know, potentially with that. But what I love about this chart is it really shows you how only those who've done the work of the diplomacy in the third house, who have really been enrolled in the school of diplomacy of how do I include the other person, really has the true ability to lead in that Aries way in the ninth house, because they really understand how to include other people. And that's what you want to think about, you know, in this time frame. And I really like how it works together.
It really is fascinating.
Yeah.
You
Keeps
know,
you humble.
yeah, it's so easy to think, you know, just about Libra and Aries just being self and other, but there's so much more in it.
Yeah.
When you start digging. But also, you know, as you with Leo rising, as you are coming into that courageous worldview, think about how you are supported by siblings, by neighbors, by just the common people in your common life. Think about releasing those relationships that don't support you, and yet shining a light on those that do.
Wonderful.
All right, moving on to those with Virgo rising. So this puts the Aries focus of the full moon into the 8th house. Now, the 8th house is really, it's a really interesting house. It's the house that speaks to how we navigate other people's deep, dark issues. You know, people would talk about the 8th house as the house of death and sex and other people's money. You know, it's these topics. It goes into these intense topics that aren't necessarily discussed in polite society. So, but if you've got Virgo rising, that's an area where you're probably more able to be direct than a lot of people are. There's a real directness in your understanding of that area. You don't shy away from it. So, you know, the 8th house is also how we navigate those difficult issues and those difficult issues with other people. So that's where you're really, the focus of this full moon is celebrating your ability to determinedly address these difficult issues. Now, the polarity brings us down to your own values. And it's kind of funny when you think about this, because if you've got Virgo rising, you've got all this determination to deal with other people's stuff. But when it comes to your own values, you may be awfully busy trying to please others and make it look like it's all, you know, kind of balanced in a way. So there's something with the South Node there. There's some story about your own values, your own ability to manage your deep issues that you really need to release in order to continue developing that courage to deal with others. I feel like I'm missing something here, Jen.
No, I mean, everything you said is being spot on. I think, you know, just to continue in that vein, it's like whenever you're talking about the second and eighth house, you're dealing with values, and there's no way that you can really think about how you value other people without thinking about how you value yourself. Like these two areas are just intimately connected. They are just going to be, you know. And so I think there's something in the learning in the second house has to do with, I mean, it can kind of go either way. Are you giving yourself away? Like you're not valuing yourself enough. You're, you know, maybe your self-esteem has taken some blows, and you kind of tend to go, well, I don't really know, you know, like I'm not really sure. There's this kind of, you know, Libran thing that's of an older version of, or sorry, of a younger version of you, of a child version, perhaps. That's kind of what you want to look at. Because really what you have to offer here is just so powerful. You have this as a value to other people. You have this diplomacy and this inclusion and this way of, you know, making sure other people feel involved. And that is a gift, you know. So what you really are working with here is, you know, releasing the old story of the younger you who kind of loses oneself perhaps in some way in how you value yourself. And then move more towards like, nope, I know my value and I know I can offer it. And that's also going to help me be totally able to be there for other people with their intense emotional issues, you know? So it's like the more that you kind of balance that Libra stuff down in the second house and valuing yourself, the more you're just going to be able to be that, you know, very strong warrior person who can be a guide for other people, who could be a leader for other people, and how you do it. So it's very tightly connected. And this just shows it.
That's interesting. It's an interesting, I love the polarities. They're so interesting just to see. You know, you can think about polarities as just two sides of the same coin. You know, they're so intimately connected. You can't think about, your own values without thinking about other people's values. You know, these are two sides of the same coin. Okay, so let's move on to those with Libra rising.
So Libra rising, this sort of I don't know, because it puts a funny little spin on this Aries full moon. So with Libra rising, what this does is it puts this Aries full moon right in partnerships for you. And again, this is not the other people around you. This is how you deal with your partnerships. So at least that's how I'm interpreting it in this case. So here it's just saying, hey, how can you be this independent, strong partner with other people? You know, how can you really hold up your end where you're really doing you're stepping into your power, you're being independent while you're also being in relationship? Because this Libra season is really sort of showing you as a Libra rising person, there's a very good possibility that you spend time worrying about what other people think, trying to please them, trying to make sure everybody feels appeased and everything's okay and copacetic. And you may have invested a lot of energy in keeping that way. Like that is definitely the suggestion with Libra rising. And the question at this Aries full moon is, how can you kind of release some of those old, you know, stories about who you are, those old images of you as this people pleaser, and instead step more strongly into this idea of you being able to be diplomatic and inclusive and collaborative, and that you want to bring people to the table, you know, and really kind of activate that Aries strong ability to be this independent person in these any of these partnership situations. So it's a funny kind of like a tennis match, like back and forth here, but it's a really interesting one, I think, for Libra rising.
Yeah, it's interesting thinking about the people that support you to be you. You know, and as a younger person, or you know, the South Node there in the first house, what you're looking at that really needs to be released is this idea that there's really nobody there to support you. You know, the Libra being relationship, you really want to find the relationships that do support you to be you. And I always think with Libra rising, you've got Aries on the 7th house. There is a likelihood that you attract to yourself or are attracted to partners that are very assertive and aggressive, maybe, well, maybe not aggressive, but very assertive and strong. So this is really showing you that, yes, okay, you may be attracted to, and you may really want to be in partnerships with people that are strong, but this is your chart. And this is speaking to the strength that you need to bring to your partnerships, that you need to courageously step forward to be a partner, not to be the doormat or whatever it is.
Yeah.
You know, because Libra can go there. You know, it's like, oh, I'll be weak and let you be strong. Well, this is really a time to look at that. How are you stepping forward and being yourself, being strong in partnership and being supported in being true to yourself?
Yeah. Yeah, I like, Laurie, that you really kind of focused in on the like who supports you, because that was something I think that is very important here. Is thinking about who authentically supports you for who you are. They don't have expectations of you. They don't think you're supposed to be someone else. They accept you how you are right now in this moment, and they're there for you. And that's it. And that's who you're looking for support. There's, you know, not these strings attached, but really the people who are just like, oh no, you're great how you are, and I'm here for you. That's the kind of support you want.
And that's tricky for people with Libra rising.
Yeah, it is.
Because they just go out into the world like looking to please everybody.
Yeah.
You know, so finding those people that truly support you and finding the strength to be truly yourself, truly authentically strong in partnership. That's an important one. Okay, we're going to move on now to those of you with Scorpio rising. Okay, people with Scorpio rising, the full moon falls in your 6th house of your day-to-day routines. What, the first thing I want you to think about if you've got Scorpio rising is, what are your day-to-day routines that support your health, your well-being? It could be things like, it could be any number of things. But with Aries being in there, in that house, your natural inclination is to take on routines that are very dynamic, and maybe you do some extreme exercise, or I don't know, you got an idea?
No, your extreme exercise. Yeah. I guess what I think about is what's really important with a Scorpio rising is burning off heat. You've got to burn, you've got to sweat, you've got to do something that really is invigorating. That's what I thought of.
Yeah, and that's really good. And how well that works for you will probably depend on where Mars is in your chart, but that's a whole nother conversation. Bottom line, what's being really illuminated at this full moon is the polarity between the 6th house and the 12th house. And that polarity is very much the 6th house being your day-to-day routines, the 12th house being your unconscious patterns of thinking or feeling. It's really your unconscious mind. And these two are both related to health. You can think of the polarities as two sides of the same coin. So the 6th house would be your physical health, and the 12th house would be more your mental or emotional health. And what you're looking at here is how the issues of the 12th house are supporting you in burning off that heat. With the South Node being here in Libra in the 12th house, along with the sun, there's some unconscious story that trips you up. That, yeah. If you're really, especially if you're listening to this and saying, I don't have any routines that burns off heat. What are you people talking about? You want to really think about what is the unconscious story in your mind that keeps you from that.
Yeah. I mean, I know, we talked about this one fairly extensively in the Libra season video, because what we talked a lot about was in that 12th house, like this need to unpack some sort of dependency or some kind of subconscious pattern that is really sabotaging you. I mean, that's what it kind of suggests with the, 12th house and Libra there. It's like, it's really looking at this, like it's very possible that your view of how you are in relationship with other people isn't really right. Like you have it skewed a little bit because of some old pattern of subconscious pattern of dependency or something, some way in which you just don't see that part of yourself, so there's something about all that. And that is preventing you from really being this leader in your routines or stepping into this independent notion of yourself in your routines.
And something in that internal voice that you just mentioned that's kind of getting in your way, it probably has a human voice. It probably is a voice that you recognize. It's probably a early family member, or it's Libra. It's some voice that you have internalized that you really this is a really important time to work on releasing that voice.
Yeah, and it's like, and how do you know what it is? It's the thing that's sabotaging your health. It's the thing that you're not allowing. You're not quitting something. You're not embracing something better you need to eat or whatever it is. But it's something to do with your physical, mental health. Like that. That's the cue. Is like, ask yourself: is there something I'm doing that is negatively impacting my health that is unnecessary? And if so, what's the source? And look in. That's this could be a very important time to really clear something out that it's really preventing you from being that independent self, so yeah. It's
Sounds
not
like
easy having Scorpio rising either. It's
no,
very sensitive and
it's not.
there's a lot going on there, so
indeed
important time.
Okay, we're going to move on to those with Sagittarius rising.
So Sagittarius rising, this means that Aries full moon is landing in your 5th house of creativity. Great time to think about, what independent projects am I taking on? Or again, you reminded me earlier, 5th house can be children. So this might be the children in your life. How do I need to make sure I'm guiding these children in my life in a way that's fun and playful, but also is raising them to be strong? I mean, these are all Aries things, but so that's what you want to think about is, independence, creative projects, possibility of children. Meanwhile, we're in Libra season, and Libra season has this flavor to it that has to do with the need to kind of look and see what we might need to release. What is some old baggage, some old dependence that we have on, in this case, what is our community supposed to be? Or what is your, you might have this expectation of your community being a certain group that is supposed to support you in your parenting or your creative project. But it might not be who you think. That's kind of one of the things I keep thinking about. It's really easy to get confused with your community and think, oh, it's my like group of pals that I always hang out with. And like, no, it's really might not be. It's really the people you go to yoga class with that you may not even know their names, but you know their face because you see them in that class, or your dance class, or your, something that has a community feel to it. It could be something totally different than the two things I mentioned, but community is the key word. So that's what you want to look at. What community is able to support you? Are they supporting you? How can they support you? And what story do you need to release to allow this to happen?
Yeah. What is that story? What, maybe there's a past situation where your community really left you bereft. I mean, we can get really hurt in community. And with Libra there, you probably tend to want to please the community. And yeah, developing diplomacy and how you work with that and allowing that diplomacy to support your creative endeavors is really important. Finding what it is, what's getting in the way, what from the area of community is getting in the way of developing, really taking on the courage to develop the creative life you want. There's something there, and it may be in the face. Yeah, it's some way community issue that needs to be released to support this growth. It's interesting.
To let you have unbridled creative self-expression. That's really what you're aiming for here.
Yeah. And your creative expression has to have a little bit of there's got to be a little tension in it. You've got to feel like you have to be a little brave to go there, because it's Aries, you got to tap into courage to really work with Aries.
Yeah, there's a little bit of a daredevil piece with Aries in the 5th house. So
yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you said that. That's a really important piece. And Sagittarius likes to be a daredevil, so that's good.
Totally.
Okay, so we'll move on to those of you with Capricorn rising. This puts the Aries full moon in your 4th house. So this really is shining a light on, I don't know, the courage it takes to go home at night. But, there's some way in which you have a lot of strength in your family. You have a lot of leadership abilities. You kind of show up at the top of the heap in your family or your idea of home. That's interesting to think about it that way.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, Anyway, the polarity itself. So the full moon is shining a light on this polarity between your home, your family, your ancestry, and how you show up in the outer world, in your career, your reputation. There's some way in which your career has a diplomatic edge to it, has an intellectual edge to it. In your career, you're trying to please people a lot. There's some way in which, with the South Node in there with the sun, there's something in that area, or something or someone that you feel is not supporting you being the family person you want to be. Something that you need to let go of in that area.
Well, it's interesting. Sorry, am I interrupting your thought there?
Just one more thing. I'm thinking in terms of, self and other, as far as the Libra being other. So, what you want to do is think about what's the old story about how my career doesn't support my home life. You've got some old story of that. And you want to really pause and look at your situation and find the people, the situation. How are you supported? Because you may be being supported to be the family person in your career. The career may be supporting that more than you think, but there's some old story that you have to release.
Yeah.
You jump in there, Jennie.
Well, I was just thinking about, I know I had a little insight too, I think the same moment you did, just about how a Capricorn rising person really is this person who has the ability to be totally independent. I really thought specifically confronting your family of origin, just being who you are, being independent, and just kind of being unapologetic and just being like, this is what it is, and that's pretty cool. That's something to be admired, because that's not very easy to go into your family of origin and kind of stand your ground and be like, look, this is who I am. And what came to mind was, and so as you kind of age and go through your life and so on and so forth, it's like with Libra in the 10th house, it's like you have this ability to kind of, have this, have your colleagues really support you, so you go to work, you show up at work, and you kind of have this banter, and you go, I had to confront my family this week about blah, 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 and you kind of have this banter. And I just like that image of getting the support that you need, because you don't just go to work and work. You go to work and you have relationships with your professional colleagues. you know, and that plays out in any number of different ways. But so that's kind of a theme here. And then I guess the question would be, you know, is there a line that you've crossed? Are you overly reliant on being able to, you know, complain at work about your family life, you know, or like that's kind of what you want to look at. Like, you know, are you truly getting support? Is it helpful? And then where is it too much? Like, where is it like, what, wait a minute, I really just need to get back to work here. I mean, those are some of the themes that I was thinking about. But ultimately, you're just going for this really balanced home and work life where you're at home and you are the, you know, leader, independent, the things you need to do at home. And then you feel supported by your colleagues and what you need to do in your home life. And that's where you're aiming for. That's what you're headed towards if you do the work.
Yeah. And if you don't, you know, if you're in a career path that does not support your home life, that's something to really pay attention to at this point in time.
Yeah. Like you might be able to be independent at home, but you got to have a very social job. I mean, that might be something you need to think about. If you're too, you know, that might be part of the picture here.
Yeah. I was just, for some reason, oh, I don't need to go down that rabbit hole. Let me.
Are you sure? Okay. Sometimes it's good insights. That's all.
Yeah. For some reason, I'm just thinking in terms of, you know, just how workplaces do support the home life of their employees, how they do and how they don't, and how much different it is now than it used to be. You know, workplaces are so much better. You know, they're certainly not perfect in many, many cases, but they're so much better about, you know, letting people have time off if their kids are sick, or, you know, those kind of things. And, you know, there's something in here about making sure you have the support of your career, of your job, to be the parent, the child of elderly parents, whatever it is. It's really important that you look at that level of support at this.
Yeah.
You think. Okay. Now we're going to move on to Aquarius rising.
So with Aquarius rising, this Aries full moon is landing in your third house. Third house is your voice, your communication, and how you use that voice to navigate your immediate environment, whether it's going out to buy groceries or, you know, transporting yourself to work or whatever it is. But that is essentially what it is, your voice. So with the Aries full moon, like you have quite the capacity to be super independent. I mean, it shows you how you have the capacity to be super independent in how you speak. And that's really awesome. You know, during this Libra season where you're kind of having to look at some old baggage or old storylines or old ideas that are sort of need to be retired. And in your case, Aquarius rising, that's all about your overall worldview. And so, I mean, it's kind of suggestive of, you know, maybe there's some way that you're overly dependent on other people for your worldview, or you're not really able to think critically. You know, like you haven't had you don't have enough confidence in your education to feel like you can think critically, that you have a valid worldview. And so you kind of give up your power and you kind of are like looking at other people to help, you know, to have them show you the way, so to speak. So that's the kind of the sort of the baggage that you'd want to look at releasing, something like that, some old thing that is holding you back. Because really what you have here with Libra in your ninth house is this incredible ability to be collaborative, God, I can't talk, collaborative and inclusive in your overall worldview, that you see this world as we're all in it together. Like we all need to help each other. There's, you know, social support. Like there's a really, it brings in this worldview that is not all about the individual, you know? And so that's kind of the Libra end of it. You want to really look at like what is going on with your worldview. And as you use this Aries full moon to kind of maybe do a little unpacking of that stuff, then you're really just going to be able to step further into that ability to speak up and be a leader in how you use your voice.
Yeah, I think you said all that really well. I'm just thinking about, you know, what the old story is there in the ninth house for you. What, you know, how have you in some way in the past been kind of silenced in your worldview, or just, you know, you've given away the power to think for yourself, like you said, to think critically. You've kind of given that power away. you want to think about that. Has that been in relation to a particular person, a particular storyline from your childhood? There's some way in which as you develop the real strength and courage to speak up, to speak your mind in that third house, to really get that Aries strong voice, will really support you to let go of that old storyline and allow your voice to come forth with the other voices of the Libra in the ninth house, because it's never going to be about your independent worldview. Your worldview is always going to be an inclusive worldview because it's Libra there, but you need to be able to bring your strong voice to it.
Yeah, and the Aquarius rising really implies a very collective oriented way of navigating life, that you are very much about that collective viewpoint. You're not just thinking about you, is at least in the way that the guiding principle of your life is about really seeing that big picture, and having Libra in the ninth house really supports that. I mean, that's really nice. So
it's lovely how these things work together, isn't it?
yes.
Okay, let's move on to those of you with Pisces rising. So if you have Pisces rising, the Aries full moon falls in your second house. And this really, having Aries in your second house really speaks to your ability to be very direct with your own values. You know who you are in a lot of ways. Isn't that funny? Pisces rising is so dreamy and drifty, and yet when it comes to the values, there's a clarity, an ability to really courageously take on personal values. There's also a strength in the ability to work with money and resources. So the polarity here brings in the eighth house. So this polarity, the polarities are always, I think of them as two sides of the same coin. The second house being your personal values, your self-esteem, your money issues, money resources. And the eighth house is the same stuff, only it's other people's. It's other people's values, other people's money. So there's this way in which, when it comes to your ability to navigate other people's values, it can be a little tricky because you tend to get a little overly concerned with keeping everybody happy if you're navigating their stuff. There's some with the South Node in that house, along with the sun right now, you're really looking, this full moon is kind of highlighting the need to pay attention to how your values are supported by the values of the people in your life. Right? There's some storyline that you really need to change the story of. There's some old story about not being supported by others, which can really result in kind of your own values being a little too hot. It's like that Aries can get really hot if it's managed to give its ability to navigate other people's stuff away. Does that make sense the way I'm saying that, Jennie?
Yeah, no, yeah, it's good food for thought, Yeah. I was thinking about something you said earlier, just about wherever Libra is in your chart, just that it's kind of where you want it to have a pretty face. Like where you want it to look nice, and you know what? The eighth house is messy and it's not clear and it doesn't necessarily look nice, and it's really hard to know what's going on in the eighth house. And so in some ways, I think with Pisces rising, this is a messy little place, where it's like you really want it to look great. You want it to look really pretty, and you don't really want to hear about other people's thing, but that's just not how it works, and actually what happens when you try to make this pretty, you end up just giving away your power. You end up just not really seeing things how they really are. And that means that you're not really fully clear about how you are being independent and how you value yourself. I mean, these two areas, they're just connected. You can't sort of do one without the other. If you push on one side, it pops up the other side. So that was kind of the flip side of like the other side of the Libra in the 8th house is like having to go, you know what? It does get messy. And I want to be able to see that other people have their struggles and to kind of allow that, I don't know, to just be a little more allowing that to be messy-ish, you know, so that you can really feel like, oh, this person has struggles and they support me and I'm supporting them. And you get this more of this two-way street,
You know,
something like that.
well, another thing that I was thinking of as you're saying that is thinking about that 8th house as the area where we really need boundaries. And
Yeah.
Libra does not have an easy time setting boundaries because they're so busy trying to make things look pretty and balance things out. So there's some way in which you have either not set boundaries, you know, that whole idea with the South Node there, that there's something you need to let go of. There's something here that this full moon is kind of showing you, maybe a boundary you set in the past that hasn't worked out for you, or you know, you realize you need to change that. But there's something in that area of boundaries that you need to let go of in order to set more appropriate boundaries. And, you know, really, I think I feel like I kind of beat this horse to death sometimes. The whole issue of you got to really understand what boundaries are. And boundaries are not what other people will do. They're what you will do. You know, you set a boundary, you set that boundary, and then you take action if that boundary is crossed.
Yeah.
You don't just yell at the other person, you crossed my boundary. Oh, well, you know.
How are they supposed to know?
Right, that doesn't get you anywhere. You have to know how you will respond if a boundary is crossed. And, you know, there may be really something here important in relation to boundaries at this.
I think so.
That might be really illuminated at this full moon.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking just in reference to like, you know, wanting this area to look pretty. Well, the only way to make it look pretty is to go in and do the work. And then you can set boundaries and you respect your own boundaries. And then it looks pretty because you respected your own boundaries, right? Now you just had so then you go back into that area. It's like, oh, look, I'm, you know, being really good about how I move forward here, and I value myself, and I've done that well, and well done. You know, so that, but it doesn't look good on the face of it. So you might want to shy away. But if you just jump in, do the work, you know, really raffle that area of your life, it will look nicer.
I'm so glad you said that, because that's really is true. That's, you know, and if you know people, and I know a few people in my life that I can point to and say, oh my God, I can't believe how well they know how to do boundaries. You know, some people, and find those people in your life, especially if you've got Pisces rising and Libra on that 8th house. Find those people in your life that you can identify as really knowing how to do it in a way that works, and emulate that. I think it's really important.
Yeah, that's great. That's how you work with this Aries full moon, is exactly what you just said, Laurie. Like finding those people who do have good boundaries. That's a great way to think about it. Because Pisces rising, you sure need that.
Yeah. So, yeah, you absolutely need. Okay, I think we are done. We did it. And we'll be back to do another one next time.
That's right. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, Laurie.
Thank you. Thank you.